We're going to study the relations of the subclavian artery, and we have the right and we have the left. Thing to understand is the right and the left subclavian arteries, they have different origins. Now the left is actually a branch of the brachiocephalic trunk, right, just behind the sternoclavicular joint. Whereas in the case of the right, it is actually a direct branch of the arch of the aorta, and so the right subclavian also has a thoracic course, but we're more concerned with the cervical course. So in both the right and in the left, we can see this over here is the subclavian artery, and we can see that it is arching laterally over the cervical pleura, and this in purple is the cervical pleura all throughout behind. From behind the sternoclavicular joint, the clavicle has been removed. Normally the articulation would have been over here, right, from behind the sternoclavicular joint to the outer border of the first rib. This is the first rib, this is the outer border, this is the inner border. So we have the scalenus anterior crossing the artery and dividing it into three parts: the medial, the posterior, and the lateral part. The relations are rather important. So which of the relations do we need to know? The first part is from here till here. So anterior relation will include the common carotid. This is the internal jugular vein draining into the brachiocephalic. We have the vagus, which is more better shown in this image over here, the vagus, right? And in addition, we have the muscles, the infrahyoid muscles. You can see this is the sternohyoid and this is the sternothyroid. These are also the anterior relations of this part. Now for the posterior relations, we have the suprapleural membrane, the cervical plexus, and the apex of the lung. For the second part, we can see over here, the whole of the scalenus anterior is not represented, just this part. That is the anterior relation of the second part, because the part that is behind the scalenus anterior is the second part. And also on the right side, the phrenic nerve is also an anterior relation, but not so on the left side. So that's an important difference. And other than this, over here in the first part and in the second part, the sternocleidomastoid will be an anterior relation. Posterior relation will, as before, we will be considering the apex of the lung, the cervical pleura, and we'll also be considering the suprapleural membrane. Now we also have superior relations in the form of the upper and the middle trunks of the brachial plexus. As for the last part is this one over here. We'll be considering the anterior relations and the posterior. Anterior will include the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid as an important relation, right? The other important bit is that over here the clavicle is not shown, but if it were shown, it would have been forming an articulation over here. So the third part has the middle 1/3 of the clavicle as an anterior relation. Posterior relations, three are the same: the suprapleural membrane, the cervical pleura, and the apex of the lung. Additionally, we will also have the inferior trunk of the brachial plexus as an important relation, as well as the scalenus medius. Superiorly, we will still have the upper and the middle trunks. And now we will also have an inferior relation, which is the first rib.